We are back with another episode of App Stories. This is John Voorhees, and of course, I am joined by Federico Vitici, and this episode is brought to you by our good friends at AirBuddy, Pillow, and Linode. Federico Vitici, how you doing today?
I am good, John Voorhees. Would you say this qualifies as a special episode of App Stories?
I think it indeed does, because you know what? There's nothing that gets me more energized than a good Apple event and a big software release. And last week we had the introduction of, boy, it was like a speed run of Apple event with all sorts of little tidbits and an iPad Pro.
It felt like a recap video, but it was the actual keynote.
I felt like I was trapped in a Sonic the Hedgehog game trying to keep up and writing about all these things. But it was a lot of fun, and there was a lot of interesting things announced. But today we're not going to talk about that. Today we're going to talk about iOS and iPadOS 14.5, which has been in beta for quite a long time. And you've been working on an in-depth review of it that will be released as soon as the software is released. That, I don't know, you've had this in the works for 3 weeks now, maybe, something like that.
Well,
and
make that months. 3 months.
Yeah.
Well,
okay. I mean, I know you've been doing a lot of testing, but I forget when you sat down to actually write it.
Well, sure. I mean, the writing itself, it's probably been a month and a half, I think. But yes, I started testing iOS and iPadOS 14.5 when they came out. I believe it was late January or early February, maybe.
Sounds right.
It's been a few months, really. And I put beta 1 on my phone, and I waited, I think, a couple of days, and then I also put the beta on my iPad Pro. And so I started testing this really a major update. I would say this is the biggest mid-cycle update. I think, yeah, I think that's about right. The biggest mid-cycle update that we've ever seen on iOS.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I think that that's true, and especially if you add in some of the things that came before this in 14, there've really been a lot of features included since we got the initial release in September.
I think that's right. We've seen a lot of different feature additions and a lot of cleaning up features, bringing consistency, as we're going to see in a few minutes with something like reminders, for example. I will say, though, this is the biggest update in terms of the quantity, the amount of new features that are present in iOS and iPadOS 14.5. I still think, though, that last year's iPadOS 13.4 update is still the most important mid-cycle update.
Yeah, I agree
because of what it enabled on the platform. So when Apple added the system pointer and the support for trackpads and the Magic Keyboard, even though there were fewer new functionalities in that update, I still think it's the most important one for all the new kinds of workflows that it enabled on iPad.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But this one, boy, the other thing about it is that new features just kept popping up throughout the beta period, even towards the very end. So why don't we dive in and talk about these? Because the first feature I want to talk to you about is the one that got me in the door, that actually made me download the first beta of 14.5, which is Face ID and the Apple Watch and the ability to unlock your iPhone based on the Apple Watch when you have a mask on.
Right. So this is I think this is the headline feature of iOS 14.5, which also requires watchOS 7.4 on Apple Watch, which is also coming alongside all the other software releases. So the way this works is really clever. You have to enable a toggle in settings under Face ID and passcode on your iPhone. And once you grant permission for your Apple Watch to unlock your iPhone, this setting only kicks in when you're wearing a mask. So when Face ID detects that there's a partially covered face trying to unlock the iPhone, it'll fall back to the Apple Watch. And in about a second, you will see that the Apple Watch, if it's obviously nearby on your wrist, protected by a passcode, right? This only works if you have a passcode on your Apple Watch. The Apple Watch will be used to authenticate you. So to unlock your iPhone, you'll see you will feel a subtle haptic tap on your wrist.
Yeah.
And you will see also, if you raise your wrist, you will see a message that says iPhone unlocked via Apple Watch. And also on the Apple Watch, again, if, and this is optional, if you raise your wrist after feeling the haptic tap, you will also get a button that says lock iPhone, which is sort of an override if, I don't know, somebody else forced you to authenticate your phone, or if you
Right.
just want to quickly override and go back to the locked state on the iPhone, you can do that from your Apple Watch. So there's one important, I think there's actually a couple of important details worth mentioning here. First of all, this is a common misconception. Face ID in iOS 14.5 is not doing any partial face recognition when you're
Right.
wearing a mask. Face ID is not trying to confirm that, say, for instance, the upper portion of your face is in fact your face. It just checks for any face that is partially covered by a mask or face shield, whatever it is that can, protective goggles, for example,
Right.
any kind of protective gear. It's just checking that. It's not saying, oh, I see that the upper portion of this face is actually John's eyes. It's not doing that. So
Yeah, it's also not, I don't think, actually looking for a mask per se.
No, it's not looking for, like, it's not just masks. You can try this with your hand covering
Right, exactly.
the lower half of your face. That is actually how I tested it when I was writing my overview for MacStories. So it's not doing that. And the second is, there's a couple of scenarios in which Apple Watch authentication for Face ID will not work. The first one is Apple Pay payments. So you will still need to either use Face ID or type in a passcode for payments from your iPhone. You cannot authenticate those via the Apple Watch. And the second is Apple Watch authentication is not enabled when your iPhone is in sleep mode. So if you use the sleep tracking features for watchOS and iOS, when you put your iPhone in sleep mode, if you try to authenticate a locked iPhone, it will not work. It'll tell you that you have to disable sleep tracking on the watch. And this is really clever, and I think it's the right call, because this prevents a potential scenario in which, say, your partner or a roommate, may walk in your bedroom at night and try to unlock your iPhone by just placing it close to your wrist, close to your
Right.
Apple Watch. And as I wrote in my story, if you have this kind of concern, you probably have bigger problems to worry
You
about.
probably do.
But still, I think it's the right design, because it asks you, you can do this, but just disable sleep tracking, sleep mode first. And to disable sleep mode, of course, you have to tap on an Apple Watch, show Control Center, and disable sleep mode in Control Center, which is, a bunch of taps on the wrist with the risk of waking up the other person. So I think it's the right design, but that's a situation, that's a scenario in which Apple Watch authentication is not enabled. I love
Right,
this feature. I think a lot of people will update their phones and Apple Watches just because of this feature. It obviously adds a tiny bit of latency to the Face ID unlocking process, because the iPhone is communicating with the Apple Watch to authenticate you. But really, in most scenarios, and especially now in the later versions of iOS 14.5, usually takes about a second to authenticate me, and it removes the annoying process. I mean, I've spent a year at this point having to type in my passcode every time I wanted to use my iPhone outside when I was wearing a mask. And this feature removes that. And because it looks like we will have to continue wearing masks, especially in stores, like in indoors for a while, especially here in Europe, where the vaccine rollout is not going as in other places, this is a very welcome addition.
It really is, and it works exceptionally well in my experience. I mean, it actually works so well that I forget that it's doing it until I get the tap on my wrist. Then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm wearing a mask, and it used that feature. It works extremely well. I've had a handful of times when it hasn't, but it's pretty rare, especially in the later portion of the beta period. And I've also noticed it kick in a couple of times when I wasn't wearing a mask, but maybe I was sitting with my hand next to my face or something, and it worked. So it's definitely not, looking for a mask, as you say. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by AirBuddy. Since its introduction, AirBuddy has helped many AirPods and Beats users get the most out of their products on the Mac by significantly improving the experience on the platform. With AirBuddy 2, this is taken to the next level with a refreshed user interface, improved reliability, and many new features. AirBuddy extends macOS to make your experience of using AirPods or any Beats headset on your Mac even better. Just open your AirPods charging case next to your Mac to see a beautiful user interface reminiscent of the one you see on iOS, which includes information about your AirPods batteries, the device they're currently connected to, and their status. It supports all versions of AirPods, including the AirPods Pro and AirPods Max, plus Beats products powered by the W1 or H1 chip. Connect and change listening modes at the same time with a single gesture on your trackpad. Using AirBuddy's connection modes, you can automate system volume, audio input, and listening mode so that you're ready to go as soon as your video conference starts. AirBuddy can also show your battery information for your iPhone, iPad, iPod Touch, and accessories like the Magic Keyboard or Magic Mouse that are connected to your Mac, and even other Macs running AirBuddy, plus their accessories too. The batteries widget can be added to Notification Center on macOS so you can see the battery information of your devices at a glance. The AirBuddy window in the menu bar shows you all of your devices intelligently grouped so you can see quickly which ones are connected to which device. With Magic Handoff, you can transfer a Magic Mouse, trackpad, and keyboard between two Macs running AirBuddy with just a few clicks, which is one of my favorite features. Smart Stats give you an overview of your AirPods battery usage over time, including total listening time, call time, and which side, left or right, is draining fastest. Custom global keyboard shortcuts let you quickly connect to, disconnect from, or change listening modes on your devices. AirBuddy is sandboxed, and it doesn't require a kernel extension to work. AirBuddy is fully compatible with macOS Big Sur and Apple Silicon, but it works on any Mac with Bluetooth Low Energy running macOS 10.14.6 or later. Go to airbuddy.app/MacStories to learn more. The first 100 App Stories listeners to go to that URL will get AirBuddy for 20% off. Again, that URL for a chance to get 20% off on AirBuddy is airbuddy.app/MacStories. Our thanks to AirBuddy for their support of the show.
I would say that the other big feature or collection of features in iOS and iPadOS 14.5 is all the changes to music. It's a really important update for not just the music app, but music integrations throughout the system.
Right. And I know we've talked a little bit about the first big headline feature, which is changing the playback default. Right. We've talked about that before, so we probably don't have to go into it in a lot of detail. But I wanted to ask you, do you think that's going to confuse people? I think that it has the potential, since it's not in the settings app, to really confuse people.
I think it's going to be confusing in the sense that a lot of people will hear, now you can change your default music service in iOS 14.5, and they will update. They will say, there's new emoji, there's a Face ID unlock with Apple Watch, and there's I can use Spotify in Siri. That's
right.
Basically the way that most people will think about this.
Right.
And they will do it, and they will not see a setting for it. And so
it's the first place I went when I downloaded the beta and heard about this.
Exactly. And this is also how I struggled when I was putting together my story. Thankfully, I captured screenshots of the configuration for music services in Siri months ago. Once I set Spotify as my quote-unquote default, that's necessary because Apple doesn't want you to think of it as default. But when I set it as a service months ago, I was never able to get Siri back into that kind of state where it presents me a list of music services and apps installed on my device. Like I was literally never able to get that list to show up again.
You asked play this on Apple Music and that kind of thing?
I did the whole dance of switching back and forth. Like maybe if I ask for Apple Music content, specifically for a few days, and
Right.
then later change my mind. Maybe Siri will prompt me to say, "Hey, you've been using Spotify and Apple Music. Do you want to make a selection again?" But nope, it never asked me again. So it all depends on how the first run experience is like. So if you're a Spotify user, and if you ask Siri after upgrading to iOS 14.5, will it show you the same list I saw months ago? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But yes, I think it'll be slightly confusing for people. So I'm sure there will be lots of tutorials and videos online produced just to show you how to get this to work.
Did you try deleting Spotify and then asking? I wonder
No.
if that would make a difference.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing is, I really don't want to delete Spotify because then it
No, I
loses all
know.
my offline downloads.
That's true.
I don't really want to do that. But still, so we are going to link the episode of App Stories where we mentioned this, and we also covered this on MacStories. So this is that's definitely one of the headline features of the music experience in iOS 14.5 and also iPadOS, because this also works on iPad. There's a lot of updates in the music app itself. So the biggest one, I will say, is the ability to share real-time lyrics. This is a really lovely feature that was added later in the iOS 14.5 cycle. The way this works is really simple. When you're listening to a song and it comes with real-time lyrics, you can long press on a line of text in the real-time lyrics screen, and it brings up a custom version of the share sheet where you can add multiple lines of lyrics to your selection, and then you can share those lyrics in 3 different places: iMessage, Facebook, and Instagram. And obviously, Facebook and Instagram, the integration depends on having those apps installed on your device.
Sure.
When you share on iMessage, you get a custom snippet that contains a play button. And that play button in iMessage plays the song that you shared at the exact point where you shared the lyrics. Whereas on Instagram and Facebook, it generates a beautiful lyrics card for Facebook stories and Instagram stories. So it's really nice. I'm a lyrics guy myself. I mentioned this many, many times before. I really care about lyrics. And what I love about this feature is that not only was Apple already ahead of Spotify in terms of real-time lyrics support, now they also have a whole custom sharing thing going. The only thing that I would like to point out, technically speaking here, is Apple is using a custom version of the share sheet that I would love to see opened up to third-party developers at WWDC. They have this customized share sheet that allows you to scroll inside the upper section and make selections. So you can scroll the lyrics and you can make selections inside the share sheet, which is not a thing that developers can use.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Well, there's a lot of little things with music too, which I haven't really gotten into the habit of using yet. But for instance, those swipe actions are quite nice, where you can swipe, what is it, left to right to reveal, the cue and putting things either at the top or the bottom.
Right, and there's also like a bunch of other smaller changes in the music app. For example, there's a new made for you section in your library page, which contains all of the made for you playlists generated by Apple Music. So your favorites mix, your new music mix, your friends mix, all that kind of stuff. Which again, and this is probably a recurring theme in iOS 14.5, is very similar to what Spotify does with the Made For You hub in the Spotify app. There's a bunch of similarities, and I think Apple, to an extent, is catching up to Spotify, both for Apple Music and podcasts, as we're going to see in a few minutes. And also, I want to point out how you can now search for record labels in Apple Music, and you can open dedicated profile pages for record labels that show you the top artists and the latest releases for a specific record label, which is a very nice touch.
This episode of App Stories is also brought to you by Pillow. Getting a good night's sleep is underrated, but with a little help, it can be life-changing. Pillow is an all-in-one sleep tracking solution to help you be more aware of your sleep patterns and discover what might be affecting your sleep quality. It's easy to fall into bad habits, but Pillow lets you get things back on track. If you have an Apple Watch, tracking your sleep is as easy as wearing your watch to bed. Pillow will track and analyze your sleep automatically. One of Pillow's most beloved features is its ability to create detailed heart rate diagrams of every sleep session. You can even compare your sleep quality with things like your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and many more health metrics to discover how they might be affecting your sleep. Pillow can optionally record sounds during the night, from sleep talking to sleep apnea and snoring or unexpected noises that might be affecting your sleep. A lot of users are surprised by the results. Pillow is also very privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. Pillow doesn't have user accounts, so you can use it anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your personal data anywhere else. Naps are a good way to boost your focus, creativity, and overall well-being, so if you have the chance to take a nap, try Pillow's Power Nap mode. If you need an alarm, Pillow can wake you up using your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad. And if you use watchOS 6 or later, Pillow uses the extended runtime to minimize battery consumption. Pillow also has a home screen widget that lets you track your sleep analysis and your daily sleep goals too. Pillow is available on the App Store for the iPhone, Apple Watch, and iPad. Discover all of Pillow's features at pillow.app. Again, that URL is pillow.app. Pillow, sleeping better made simple. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of the show.
Next up, John, I want to cover shortcuts.
Yes, there's not a lot here, but there are a couple of new actions which are handy ones.
Not a lot of changes, but you can now programmatically take a screenshot in using shortcuts. So there's a new take screenshot action, which it does what it says. It just takes a screenshot and passes an image of whatever is in the foreground to the next action. I would have liked to see a parameter in this action to add a delay for the capture.
Oh, yeah, so that would be nice.
It would have been nice if you could delay the screenshot capturing so that you could get your home screen, or an application that you're using just in the right position, for example, like you can do on the Mac. I tried to sort of work my way around this by adding a delay, like a delay action before it. But the problem is, because of the way that shortcuts run with Compact UI in iOS 14, if you try and scroll away from the Compact UI notification, the shortcut also stops running.
Right.
So it really cannot be used for that. And the other action is to control orientation lock on your iPhone and iPad. This is fascinating because you could combine these, as I detail in my story. You can potentially combine this with automations, with personal automations, to keep orientation lock always enabled so that your iPhone never switches to landscape mode, except for when you open a video app. So YouTube, Netflix, or Safari, if you want to watch videos in Safari, so that when you open those apps, you could disable orientation lock and re-enable it when you close those apps again.
Yeah, that's a really nice feature. I like it a lot. Why don't we move on to the iPad? Because there's a handful of things here, and I feel like, we just got new iPad Pros, and I think that Apple is going to do some things at WWDC to offer new features there, but we really didn't get a lot in 14.5. I think they're holding things for 15.
Yeah, there's not a lot of iPad stuff in 14.5, and it does feel like they are waiting for the other shoe to drop at WWDC, so to speak.
Right.
But there's a few things. Scribble, which is the Apple Pencil feature that Apple rolled out in iPadOS 14 that transcribes your handwritten text to typed text, is now expanding to more languages. There's a new API for developers to react to microphone changes when a microphone gets muted, when a smart folio or a smart cover is closed on top of the iPad, which is a privacy feature that Apple rolled out last year. And I think the two most important features for iPad, one of them isn't really that important, but it's a nice sort of a
Nice
finally
touch.
nice touch. It's a
Right.
nice finally type feature. When you reboot your iPad, if it's in landscape mode, you will see the Apple logo in landscape. Finally, since the iPad came out over 10 years ago, the Apple logo
Yeah.
was always stuck in portrait mode on the
Yep.
lock screen. Now it's in landscape. And the other feature, Apple also brought emoji search to the iPad. Previously, emoji search was exclusive to iOS 14 and the iOS 14 emoji keyboard on iPhone. For really whatever reason, it was really unclear why it was an iPhone exclusive. Now you can also search for emoji by name on iPad. You have this new emoji popover that comes up when you can search for emoji there. You can make selections using the arrow keys on an external keyboard, and yeah, it's nice. You can search for emoji, and that's really it in terms of iPad changes.
Yeah, there's not a lot there. But you know what? We've come to a very important part of this conversation, Federico, which is something very rare in the annals of MacStories.net, which is I have a section in your lengthy review. Your review is several thousand words long. And I have a paragraph right there in the center all about
Yes.
the new emoji. Because, as you know, you might be familiar with Federico's other show on Relay FM, which is connected, that he does with Mike Hurtley and Stephen Hackett. And they are going to do the Jeremys very soon to ask Federico to guess what the new emoji are and what their actual names are. Because sometimes the names are a little funny. So we have kept these emoji from Federico, and I wrote the paragraph about the new emojis, and we're not going to talk about them here either.
That is true. That is true. I have not looked at the new emoji.
I hope not.
I tried my best to stay away from those.
It's hard when you're on the beta and they're already in your phone and your iPad, right?
I know it's been, but also like with all the people writing about it and then having screenshots and blog posts. Like I really wanted to visit Emojipedia, but I couldn't. So
Yeah, I know, but soon enough, right? Soon enough.
yeah, exactly. Moving on, let's see. There's a bunch of Siri changes that we also covered on MacStories. So first of all, Siri does not default to a female voice anymore. In fact,
Right.
Siri voices are no longer gendered in Siri at all. They're just labeled voice 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I mentioned 4 because for English speaking users, Apple is adding two brand new Siri voices that sound really good. And I really like the new inflection and tone. Those are really good Siri voices, I think. But yes, they're not defaulting to a female voice anymore, and the voices are no longer gendered, which is, I think it's a great call. And hopefully, it opens up the door for all kinds of non-binary voices in the future. Because right now
Right.
they are still clearly gendered voices, even though they're no longer labeled as such.
Right. They're just not identified. Right. They're not labeled that way.
So hopefully, even John Gruber wrote about this too. Hopefully, this means that in the future we will get even more variety with non-binary voices in Siri, which I think it's a thing that Apple should do.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction.
Yes, and also they are expanding the neural TTS technology for higher quality text-to-speech voices to more languages. I believe Russian, Italian, and Irish are the new.
Yes.
I don't use Siri in Italian, so I don't know about the fancy new machine learning based Italian Siri. I would use Italian Siri if I could actually have multilingual Siri.
Yeah, that would be nice.
That would be nice, just like I can have my Amazon Echo in Italian and English at the same time.
And the keyboards, right? I mean, the keyboards have been like that for a long time now, since 2016, I think it was.
Yeah, I really hope it's one of the things that we get at WWDC for iOS 15.
I'm curious about Irish because I'm wondering whether this is Gaelic or is it just an Irish accent. I suppose it's Gaelic. I don't know. I mean, I haven't given it a try. Maybe we should ask Finn, see what he says.
I have no idea what that means.
You don't know what Gaelic is?
No.
It is the Irish language.
Isn't it called Irish?
No,
Really?
it's not. No, it's not. It's called Gaelic. It's another language. It's a totally different language.
Interesting.
Yeah, you should check it out.
Is it so? Does it sound like English?
No, not at all.
Really?
Not at all. No, yeah, it's in. You should check it out. You should Google it after we're done with the show. And a lot of the signage in Ireland is in Gaelic too.
Oh wow! So is it like based on French?
That's a good question. I really don't know of any idea what the origins are.
Interesting. All right. You learn something new every day.
Yes, you do. You have to go to Ireland sometime. It's a nice country.
There's all kinds of places that I would like to visit, but
I know. I would like to visit again myself.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by our friends at Linode. You can simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines, helping you develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing enterprise infrastructure, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions that allow you to take your project to the next level. You can expect simple pricing with no hidden fees, unlike other cloud hosting companies that might charge you for services you don't use. Linode are independently owned and founded on a love for Linux, open source technologies, and the community that surrounds them. They provide 24/7 human support 365 days a year with no tiers and no handoff, regardless of your plan size. We're users of Linode at MacStories ourselves. We love it for the level of support, fair pricing, and all the robust services that are available. And you can check it out for free. Get started right now on Linode today with $100 in free credit for listeners of App Stories by going to linode.com/appstories. In addition to shared and dedicated compute instances, you can use your $100 credit on S3 compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more. If it runs on Linux, it runs on Linode. So go on over to linode.com/appstories and click on the Create Free Account button to get started and get that $100 free credit. Go there now and check it out. Our thanks to Linode for their support of the show.
Moving on, let's see. Now we enter the sort of a grab bag.
It's a deep grab bag, though. It's a little bit like that couch during the event where the guy dives into the couch looking for his keys with an AirTag.
Yeah, it's more like a grab suitcase that you're taking to the airport kind of bag. So let's see. A bunch of other changes to Siri. Let's start from Siri. So in addition to the new Siri voices, there's a new option to call your emergency contacts. So not just emergency services, but you can ask Siri to call my emergency contacts, and it'll automatically place a phone call to one of your emergency contacts as you set them in the medical ID section of the Health app.
The Health app. Yep.
This is useful because it means if you ever happen to have to take someone else's phone because they're not, they having problems or they've been in an accident or whatever, you can call their emergency contacts from their iPhone's lock screen on their behalf.
Because before it was just the SOS feature, which would call whatever the local authorities were, like an ambulance or the fire department or whatever it might be.
But now you can also say, call my emergency contacts, and Siri will work from the lock screen to do that.
Right.
You can now use Siri to start group FaceTime calls. So this works for groups of contacts as well as named groups in iMessage. So, for example, if you have a group called Family, you can say start a group FaceTime with Family, and you can say FaceTime or FaceTime audio, and Siri will do the right thing and start the appropriate FaceTime call with the group. And there's a new hands-free support for answering calls, so answering phone calls with Siri without saying the invocation phrase. So this is made possible by the announce calls setting, which has been around for a few years, I think. But now,
I think so.
If you're wearing AirPods 2 and later, and some Beats headphones, you can answer calls just by responding to Siri. So when a phone call comes in, Siri will say, incoming call from, say, John, do you want to decline or answer? And if you just say answer without saying, hey, assistant, it'll do that. And it'll answer the call for you, which is very nice. Totally hands-free.
Yeah, that's very nice. It feels a little old. It feels so old fashioned. I get so few
I
calls
know.
that aren't spam calls, but it is a handy thing.
I know. John, do you used to be, this is totally unrelated to the show, but
Uh
in
huh.
your previous life as a lawyer, do you
Yes.
used to be the kind of lawyer that, goes to work in downtown and is wearing a
Uh huh.
Bluetooth headset?
No, I was never that guy. No, no. I always mocked those guys, which is probably what led me to my current career. I would never really fit into quite that mold, so I always thought that was awful.
If our listeners are curious about our personal lives, and most of all, my understanding of American culture and American
Right.
stereotypes and traditions, make sure to subscribe to Club MacStories and listen to our members only show called MacStories Unplugged. Because that is the kind of personal behind the scenes that covers all these. It's pretty much all questions like this one.
Yes, yes, and that actually, my former career is a very deep vein that we have not explored much yet, and I think that would
I
probably
know.
be a good place for you
I'm
to.
saving it for the future. There's a
All right.
there's a lot of ground to cover there. Anyway,
There is a lot. There's a lot. Oh, we have more to cover, so we need to move on. I think I want to mention one that I've had here in the United States. I don't think you have this, which is the accident, hazard, and speed check
yeah.
alerts in maps. That's not in Italy, is it?
Nope. None of the new
Yeah.
fancy maps features are in Italy.
Right. I didn't think so. And you've got a couple of screenshots which are from me, and I checked it out, and I actually so far I've seen one speed check when I was driving around in downtown Chicago, and then just the other weekend I was getting on the highway and I got a hazard alert, and so I quickly took a screenshot as I was getting onto the highway so it could be included in your review. But
Thank
yeah,
you.
it's not, it's nice. It's the kind of thing that has been done for a while with apps like Waze, but it's a good addition because in my limited experience, it picks up, it'll, for instance, with the speed checks, it'll tell you what the speed limit is, so that if there's a camera coming up, you can slow down, or if there's a light coming up, you can make sure you don't go through a very yellow light and get a ticket that way. And the hazard is displayed right there in CarPlay when I was driving onto the highway, and showed me exactly where it was. It was about half, and how far ahead it was. And yeah, it's just a nice way to kind of get more information about your route.
Very nice. And thank you for the screenshot, John. Thank you for your service. That was really useful. We should obviously mention the big privacy related addition
Oh,
to
we should.
iOS 14.5, which is the new app tracking transparency feature. So, with this feature, Apple is enforcing the ability. Well, it's a couple of things actually. All applications will have to disclose whether they are using cross-property tracking for apps and websites. So this
Right.
is the kind of intrusive tracking that is, unfortunately everywhere on the web and in apps these days, where like you're doing something on a website, but another website is also tracking you, or you're doing something in an app and then later you find, for example, ads on Google for the thing that you were doing in an app on your phone, which is
Right.
this is the kind of thing that is made possible by cross-property tracking. And now in iOS 14, apps that access it's called the advertising identifier. Apps that use that technology for tracking will have to display a permission prompt before they are able to do any tracking whatsoever. If you deny the ability to track, the advertising identifier that will be passed to the application will be I believe a string of zeros. So
Okay.
an identifier that does not actually identify your
Doesn't do
device
anything.
doesn't do anything. However, there's an even bigger and more important aspect to this, which is you can go to your privacy settings in iOS 14.5. So open settings, privacy, and you can outright disable the ability for apps to even ask you to track you. So you can just effectively have a global switch to say, I don't ever want to be tracked. I don't ever want to be asked to be tracked. And so by flipping that switch, you disable all sorts of tracking on your device in all kinds of apps. And you can also review the apps that you've granted or denied permission to. I personally fall totally on Apple's side here. This is honestly like the reason why we don't have regular ads on MacStories. I find them creepy. I find them intrusive. I find them gross. And I think it's a tragedy that cross-property tracking has become so commonplace on the web over the past decade. That is my personal opinion. But yeah, I do believe this is a fantastic privacy-related addition to iOS.
I'm right there with you, Federico. And, I think it was possible to turn off this tracking before. The big difference here now is that you're prompted. And so I think Facebook and other companies that enable this kind of tracking, that they are worried that most people will say no, because it really is kind of a leading question, right? I mean, Apple's saying, you don't really want these people to track you all over the place, do you? And I think a lot of people will say no, although I did just see a study that said something like 40 or 50% of people were saying yes to those prompts, which I thought was interesting. That's more than I would expect, but it remains to be seen what the effect on the ad industry is. But I think an ad industry that doesn't track people between sites is a better ad industry. So that's just my personal opinion, but it seems to be in line with what Apple's doing with 14.5. Federico, there's also been a change to reminders, which really brings it in line with the Mac, right?
Yes. So the ability to sort your reminders in specific lists has been available, I guess, on the Mac for a while. I know this information because our friend of the show, Stephen Hackett, reminded us, because he's a
closet reminders user.
Well, he's a Mac Power user also.
Oh, well, that too.
So he knows everything about all these settings and options. So now you can sort your reminders on iOS and iPadOS as well. You can do so from the ellipsis menu inside at the top of your reminders lists. You have the options to sort by ascending or descending order. You can also do manual sorting via drag and drop. And what's nice, and I think kind of interesting here, is that they are syncing your sorting order across devices. Now, I'm not sure syncing your sorting order is a totally common practice. There's a few services that do it, like I think Todoist does it. But that's the only other example I can think of, because usually sorting preferences are like local type settings.
Usually they are, yeah.
Usually they are. In this case, reminders is syncing that over iCloud. So, if you like it, it's a nice touch.
Yeah, I suspect Todoist does it because they have a web app too.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense in that kind of scenario. Yeah, it's a nice thing to have.
Also, very important reminders feature. You can now print your lists.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even put that in our list. I totally forgot about that. I've never printed a reminders list.
Make fun of it, but I do think that there's actually going to be like a lot of people that do this, because
for the grocery list or that
for
kind
the
of
grocery
thing,
list, I still see a lot of people using like little pieces of paper at the supermarket.
When they go to the grocery store.
Although I have to wonder, do they I've noticed them do that perhaps even more in the past year. Was that a byproduct of having to wear a mask and phones with Face ID failing to authenticate you? So we'll see. But still, if you want to print a list, you can now do that from the Reminders app.
I think old habits die hard, and that people will be scratching out grocery lists on pieces of paper for years to come. But it's nice that you can print it and it'll look neat and tidy, and it won't just be you scratching something out with a pen.
Yeah, Sylvia's mom does that. The pieces of paper, yeah. Let's see. On the TV front. So in the TV app, you can now mark entire series as watched, which is a cool time-saving addition if you want to quickly catch up on something that you already watched, like an entire season. You don't have to mark individual episodes as watched one by one. You can mark the entire season, which is nice. And also, you covered this, John, on MacStories last week. As part of tvOS 14.5, you can now perform color calibration for your TV using a combination of the Apple TV and your iPhone. So This feature is available in tvOS 14.5 for not just the new Apple TV 4K, which is not out yet, but also for the old 2015 Apple TV HD, as well as the 2017 first generation Apple TV 4K.
Right.
This is only available for standard HDR and SDR video output settings. So if your Apple TV is set to Dolby Vision output, this option will be disabled because Apple says Dolby Vision is already calibrated.
It's already a thing. Yeah.
You don't need to do any further calibration. But if you use your TV in HDR or SDR, you can now use your iPhone. And it's kind of fun because basically the Apple TV shows this. It looks like the pairing UI for the Apple Watch, with all the
that's
moving.
What it reminded me of. Yep. The HomePod is like that too.
The HomePod too, and you need to, but instead of looking at that pattern on the TV with your iPhone's camera, you need to turn your iPhone. You have to basically use the front-facing light sensor.
Right.
It's like the TV is taking a selfie, basically.
Right. Here, smile, and we're going to take up a selfie of you. And
you need to place your iPhone, to point it at a specific area of the TV.
Yeah.
And in that area, the TV will flash these blocks of different colors, like red, green, white, and blue, I think. And the iPhone's light sensor will measure the brightness levels and the colors. And then later you will see the before and after on the TV. It's like, here's what your picture looks like after calibration. Do you want to use it? And you can confirm and you can use it. And it's really nicely done. Kind of futuristic in a way.
That is cool. I'm going to have to do that. And here, as a weird aside, I was doing screenshots last week for our coverage. And it was interesting to me that there wasn't actually an image of this. There was a little video of this, and I captured a screenshot from the video. And I think the reason Apple didn't do any stills is that it looks a little strange as a still because there's all these little dots all over the screen, and in a still it kind of looks like static or something.
Yeah, yes, it does.
Right, and it wasn't the best screenshot I've ever used in a story, but when it's in a video, it looks kind of neat because it is like a giant Apple Watch type of thing with the colored dots moving around on the screen.
Yeah. Speaking of calibration, there's also, if you have an iPhone 11 or 11, like one of the iPhone 11 models, iOS 14.5 will perform over the course of multiple days a battery recalibration because of incorrect measurements in previous versions of iOS. So give it a few days. Apple has a support document that I guess we can link in the show notes with more details on what you should expect from this battery recalibration process. Next up. Now, there's a bunch of apps that we need to cover here. Find My. So obviously...
lightning round, right?
Yes. Find My obviously is getting... We wrote about this on MacStories multiple times. There's a new items section. This is where you can track the location of compatible third-party accessories, but also where I think most App Stories listeners will track the location of their upcoming AirTags accessory, which Apple finally announced after a couple of years last week. The AirTag is coming at the end of the month, I believe, and you will be able to track those tags in the Find My app. And
interesting to me that they look just like what was rumored.
Oh yeah, totally. Like it's.
I mean, they look like a battery with a little white dome disc on the other side, which I didn't really expect would be the case. And they actually look pretty nice, but I was surprised that they look like they do.
There's a little speaker inside of the AirTag that plays a noise.
They're $29 and 4 for $99. So you can engrave emoji, 31 emoji on the outside, or text, but you can't use all the emoji at one time, Federico. I put that in my story because I didn't want people to be confused that they could fit that many emoji on this tiny little device.
Sure. And for the AirTags, specifically the Find My app, has a bunch of exclusive features for what Apple calls precision finding. They have this custom UI that sort of looks like turn-by-turn directions, but for AirTags with these giant arrows that guide you toward the physical location of the AirTags, which is made possible by a combination. Again, we go back to the idea of one of the advantages of the Apple ecosystem is all these different technologies coming together. And in the case of precision finding, they use the ultra wideband via the U1 chip, the camera, the gyroscope, the accelerometer.
Right. And ARKit.
All these different technologies to precisely find AirTags in the physical space around you. So that's cool.
I think this is really interesting from an AR standpoint, because when you see this app in action, it really makes you think about things like walking directions outside and how that kind of thing might work with AR glasses, for instance. So,
John, what if people were all AirTags?
Right. Wow. You just blew my mind, Federico.
What if all of us had the same capabilities of AirTags?
How about that? What if we did? I thought you were going to say, what if we could put charts and diagrams on our glasses in front of us, like Tim Cook is looking forward to.
I'm thinking bigger. I'm thinking way, way bigger.
You're thinking way bigger. That's boy, there's some real philosophical questions there, Federico. I think we're going to have to save those for another day.
Some people, unfortunately, think that's what happens when you get the vaccine, which is totally stupid.
Yes.
But that's the joke. It's funny when I see the joke, but like people say, I got vaccinated, so now I got better 5G signal,
Right.
which I understand as a joke. Like, I get the joke. What's really sad is that some people really believe that stuff.
Yes, they do.
Please don't believe that stuff. Moving on. Apple News. So in Apple News, you have a better For You in the Apple News section. There's now a For You tab that makes it easier to find content tailored for you. There's now the very welcome comeback of the search tab in Apple News. Previously, Apple had removed the search page. Now it's back as a main tab at the bottom on the iPhone. And you can also now search for article content. So Apple calls it article search. So in addition to publications, you can now also search for stories in Apple News. And Apple is also rolling out this new Apple Music channel in Apple News, where you can find artist interviews, transcripts of things like the Zane Lowe interviews from Apple Music, deep dives on an artist's catalog or specific albums, track-by-track breakdowns of new releases. Really fun stuff. So Apple is bringing editorial content.
Yeah, it's something that you and I have talked about many times, right?
Right. It's the kind of thing that we started, talking about 3 years ago, I believe, with iOS 12. When Apple did the Apple News integration with stocks of all apps, but
yes, this was in your review.
Yes, but I think it's much more interesting to see where this goes with Apple Music and Apple News.
I want to ask you, before we get to some of these smaller features, I want to ask you about podcasts, because last week not only did we see the podcast subscriptions, which is something that we should probably talk about at some point, but that's more of a business model type of thing. The app itself has seen changes, partly to accommodate that new subscription service, but also other updates. What's going on with podcasts?
Yes, there's a bunch of really interesting things in the podcasts app. So the first one, I think, is the redesigned show pages. They look a lot better than before. So
they really do.
They are now using this big, bold show artwork at the top of the page on iPhone. It looks really nice. It's like edge-to-edge artwork for a show. Really good looking. And this redesigned show page also features what Apple calls a Smart Play button. So my understanding is that it's called the Smart Play button because it can do a couple of things depending on your context. So if it's a new show that you're not following, which is the new terminology for it, because again, you subscribe to paid shows, but you follow the free ones. If it's a show that you're not following, the Smart Play button automatically starts playing the latest episode. If you're coming back to a show that you're already following, it resumes what you were playing before. Or if it's a show that you follow, it'll play the next episode if previous episodes are already played. So it does it's got a bunch of different behaviors depending on how you're using the app. So that's the redesigned show page. They also have a redesigned search page, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Apple is catching up to Spotify here. And they sure have and there's even a comparison image in my story. They have this new categories layout in the search page that makes it easy for you to navigate between different categories of podcasts in the Apple Podcast catalog.
Yeah. It's also a lot like the music search page now, which before was just kind of an empty page, but now it's got those tiles with the categories.
Right. So you have things like true crime and business and news, all kinds of categories, and top charts, obviously.
Right.
They have moved a few things around as well. So in the main Listen Now page, there's this new profile icon, the profile picture in the top right corner of the page, where I guess it's where this is where you will manage your Apple Podcast subscriptions next month when they launch publicly. And they have a redesigned library page as well. The episodes feature is now called Saved Episodes. Again, very similar to Spotify. You can save individual episodes. They are automatically downloaded for offline listening, and they sync across devices. So you don't have to follow a show if you want to just listen to an episode. And they are now also, I guess Apple was also inspired by Overcast, which pioneered this feature years ago. They display episode frequency in Apple Podcasts. So if you want to get a sense of whether a show is weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, that information is now displayed in the podcast app.
Yeah, I've always really liked that with Overcast. I would think it's a great feature to copy.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in podcast? Because I guess I would call this the grab bag of the grab bag, but there are a few other smaller features that we should just run through very quickly before we conclude this. Let me start. Let me hit a couple of these, and you can jump in because you know more of the details than I do. But first of all, translation speed. There are now options for different translation speeds when you're using the translation feature, which, okay, sounds great. There's also some new SF symbols, including the HomePod Mini.
Yes.
And we've got new controller support. We've got support for the PS5 controller as well as the latest Xbox console. So you can use those with, your Apple TV or your Mac or your iOS devices. So that's nice. Those are good controllers. So definitely a thing that's nice to have in addition. Is there anything else besides that, Federico?
No, that's pretty much it. I will just add that Apple mentioned this last week, that if you're using the DualSense controller, developers can take advantage of haptic feedback.
Oh, true.
Now, this API was actually added last year. And obviously it was added, but there wasn't any support for the DualSense controller. But now you can use the DualSense on your iPad. So in theory, developers will be able to support core haptics on a DualSense Bluetooth controller on iOS and iPadOS.
Very good. Very good. Well, that's a lot. So as we said, this is probably the biggest update in a very long time. Maybe not the most significant, but the most packed of any one that we've seen in recent history. I want to thank our three sponsors again for this show. That's AirBuddy, Pillow, and Linode. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHN VOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.